Welcome everyone. This week we're going to discuss some of the Divrei Torah of Parsha's Vayeshev. The struggle between Yosef and his brothers, their internal and external conflicts are not easily dismissible as just some sort of sibling rivalry. There was much more going on. Who gets privileges, who gets the window seat, and things like that. Their arguments were fundamental differences in the way they viewed the leadership of their family at present and of their descendants in the future. It wasn't just some sort of simple sibling rivalry. And so when Yosef dreams of storks and stars bowing down to him, the brothers were upset. How dare this young brother of ours decide that he's going to lord over us? Here he is, the second to youngest in the family, fantasizing about leadership over his older siblings. In addition, when he related the dreams to his brothers in front of his father, the Torah tells us that his father scolded him. And it said, "What is this dream that you have dreamt?" Ma chalom hazeh shechalamta. Yaakov scolded Yosef. Are we to come, I and your mother and your brothers, to bow down to you to the ground? Because he wanted to dismiss it so that the brothers shouldn't be upset with him. But the Torah tells us that despite the open rebuke, Yaakov knew that there was some method to this, that he was concerned that this actually would come true. The Torah ends the pasuk with the words, his brothers, vekanu bo, his brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the matter in mind. Ve'aviv shemaret hadabar. And Rashi tells us that Yaakov was waiting for the day would happen, that this actual dream would come to fruition and bear reality. Rashi interprets the word shomar, watched. Rashi tells us Yaakov waited and looked forward to the time when this would come to pass, while others interpret Shomar. Yaakov went so far as to write down the time and the place that Yosef would actually emerge king. The word Shomar that describes Yaakov's silence seems peculiar. If the Torah means to say that he waited in anticipation for it to occur, it could have written Yaakov anticipated. The word watch connotes that Yaakov knew a secret truth that he wasn't willing to share with everyone. What is the point in telling us that? Is there an advantage in discussing it? Perhaps the Torah is telling us something else in Yaakov's presence while withholding his belief as well. What was Yaakov actually hiding? So here's a beautiful illustration, a story which tries to explain what the point is here. Many years ago, young Mark Honingsfeld accompanied his parents on a trip to Israel. Mark was excited about the wonders and beauty of the Holy Land of Eretz Israel and was invigorated and enthused about every site they visited, from Masada to the various museums. But one visit to Yeshiva Har Tzion in the old city of Yerushalayim left an eternal impact on Mark's soul and a gaping hole in his heart. At Yeshiva Har Tzion, which is located right there in the mountain, there's a Holocaust museum with an exhibit memorializing the 6 million Jews who were killed by Hitler, Yamach Shemo. Many of the tiny towns of Eastern Europe are indicated by memorial plaques. It is a declaration that these towns, with their muddy roads and their ramshackle huts, were once beacons of spirituality and Torah life. Mark's father, Paul, found a plaque memorializing his native city of Belgitz, which was a small community in Poland. And he asked the curator of the museum if he, like many of the survivors who visited the museum, could add the names of family members who had once lived in that city and who were killed by the Nazis, Yimach Shemam. While Mark was watching in the background, his father sat with the museum curator and gave the names. "Please list my mother, Sarah Devora," Paul said. "I want you to memorialize my father, Ephraim Fischel, and my sisters and my brothers." Suddenly he asked Mark, "Please leave the room," Paul said to his son. A bit disturbed, Mark sauntered from the dark memorial room, wondering why in the world his father asked him to leave the room. Suddenly he heard his father begin to cry. Sitting outside the room, Mark cried too. And then he heard his father say a name, a very close relative, that he never knew existed. "I had a son, Ephraim Fischel ben Chaim Peretz. Please make a plaque for him too." Mark could not imagine who Ephraim Fischel was. Mark had two older sisters, and he could not imagine that a child had been born between his sisters and himself. Who was his father talking about? When his father left the museum, Mark gently confronted him. "Dad, did I have a brother? What was it? Was his name Ephraim Fischel? When did I have this brother? Where? Why didn't you ever tell me, Dad?" Reluctantly, his father told him that he was married before the war, and he had a wife and a son who were killed by the Nazis. Then he added, "You know, Mark, not everything that happens does a child have to know immediately. Sometimes a father has to watch what he tells his children while he determines the impact it will have on them. Forgive me for never telling you that you had a brother, but there are just some things a father must wait and not speak about until the right time." And this is an incredible lesson in the chinuch, or the education of our children. Sometimes, perhaps in relating those few words, defining Yaakov's reaction or inaction, the Torah is telling us a lesson in parenting. Yaakov felt that one day in the future, it would surely happen. Yosef's brothers would bow down to him. He was pretty sure of that. Yet he never revealed his concerns. Instead, he watched and waited for them. He may have thought that there was a true substance to Yosef's dreams, but he held back because sometimes notions can raise sore emotions. Yaakov knew that if he would tell his sons at the time that this was going to happen, because in Ruach HaKodesh he had the ability to perceive it, it would have created catastrophe for his family, and he didn't want that to happen. Sometimes it's important as a parent not to speak. Sometimes silence is golden. We'd like to move on to Dvar Torah number 2 now. A terribly sad thing happened on the way to the fields. Yosef did not get along with his 10 older brothers. As the oldest son of Rachel, he was favored by Yaakov, and his brothers resented him for this. Indeed, Yaakov spent more time with Yosef and made him a multicolored garment, as we are told, Kitonet Pasim. Yosef exacerbated the brothers' dislike by relaying dreams that depicted that he would be supreme over them. This only made the pain and the problems between him and them even worse. And so the Torah tells us that his brothers hated him. The older brothers would tend to sheep, while he would stay home studying with his father. The Torah tells us that Yosef was asked by his father, go see the welfare of your brothers and the welfare of its own, the flock, and bring back word and tell me and reassure me that everything is okay. Yosef set out to find them but got lost. He was spotted by a man who the Midrash identifies as the angel Gabriel. The man asked Yosef, what are you looking for? And in response that is interpreted, Yosef replies, it is my brothers, I'm looking for my brothers. The man told Yosef, they're in Dotaina. They're in Dotan. That's where you could find them. That's what Gabriel told Yosef. And then the Torah tells us something interesting. Referring to the brothers, the Torah tells us, and they saw him coming, and when he had not yet drawn near to them, they plotted against him to put him to death. So now let us kill him, the brothers said, and we will cast him into one of the pits, and we will say a wild beast devoured him, and we will see what will become of this fussy dreamer. The rest is history. Reuven convinces his brothers not to kill Yosef, but rather throw him into the pit. Eventually, the brothers remove Yosef and sell him to the Ishmaelites, who begin a chain of transactions that ultimately lands him as a slave to an Egyptian master Potiphar. As we know, the rest is indeed history. I'd like to take a note of what if, should have, and could have aspects of the events. When Yosef is coming near to his brothers, the Torah uses a curious expression. And they saw him near from afar, and we had not yet drawn next to them. They plotted against him to put him to death. First, if the brothers wanted him dead, they could have discussed it all morning, way before Yosef came into their line of fire. So why suddenly did they discuss it now? Secondly, why the redundant expression, and it says, and they saw him from afar, and when he had not yet drawn near to them, they immediately plotted against him to put him to death. Why not simply say, and they saw him from afar, and they plotted to put him to death? Of course, if they saw him from afar and plotted right away, they must have plotted before he drew near. Why the double expression? So here's an incredible story that tries to explain the lesson we want to teach here. It was the year 1812. Where there was a lot of tension between the United States and its former possessor, Great Britain. Because of an embargo on France, Britain was in a tremendous conflict with France. Britain was interfering with American shipping and had violated the American flag at sea by seizing and arresting persons on U.S. vessels. British warships violated United States waters and interfered with American ships as they entered and left ports. The U.S. had negotiated with Britain for quite a while to change policies to leave the American ships alone, while Britain had its own private conflict with France. But to no avail. On June 1st, 1812, President James Madison of the United States sent a message to the United States Congress that he was ready to declare war against Britain. The conflict formally began on June 18th, 1812, when James Madison signed the measure into law. Unfortunately, this could have been avoided. It did not have to be. In early May of 1812, British Prime Minister Spencer Perceval was working on repealing the orders that would have prevented British ships from bothering the American ships when he was killed by an assassin in early May. Lord Liverpool became Prime Minister and wanted a more practical relationship with the United States. Only 2 days before the United States declared war, the British government under Prime Minister Liverpool declared that it would repeal the laws which were the chief reason for the problem with the United States. Unfortunately, it took 3 weeks for the news to cross the Atlantic. Before the British messenger ships reached the U.S., it was too late. President James Madison had already signed the declaration of war, and U.S. troops attacked British Canadian towns across the Detroit River. It was too late. Before the British reached the U.S. to make peace, the United States had already declared war. War that was plotted, hatched, and executed. Now, let's get back to our story. Perhaps when Yosef said to the man, I seek my brothers, he meant that he seeks to reconcile with them and he wants brotherhood with them, because he says, where are my brothers? Perhaps he was trying to make peace with them, but it may have been too late. His brothers saw him from a distance. Before he was able to get too close to them, they already had made up their decision. Perhaps if Yosef somehow was able to sneak up on them and embrace them, we may never have had the sale of Yosef that has cost our nation so much anguish. Until today we're in Galus because of this sale, and it has caused us strife for generations. Maybe the Torah means to tell us all, they saw him from afar, and before he was able to get close, they plotted to kill him. Often we see people who want to approach us and to make amends with us and to make peace with us, but yet we make our own plans. We make assumptions and we act on those assumptions before they allowing these people to get close and get back to us. If only we would allow Yosef to embrace his brothers he seeks before they begin to start plotting against them, we would have all been living in a better world. Maybe if we would sneak up and embrace our brothers before they have bad actions against us, we'd be living in a better world. We could have avoided catastrophes in our personal lives, much the same like Yosef could have been avoided with his sale. Here's Devar Torah number 3. Often it's hard to discern between acts of good intent and acts of good intent marred in selfishness. In this Parsha, we see two seemingly similar stories that are really quite different. Tamar was the wife of Yehuda's son, Er. And when he died, Yehuda had his next son, Onan, marry her. Through prophetic vision, Tamar knew that she was destined to bear the future offspring of Yehuda. She had Ruach HaKodesh. She knew from Yehuda would come children, and that those children would lead to David HaMelech. And that she knew that line would eventually beget King David. But Onan, his second son, died too, and Yehuda refused to have Tamar marry his last son, Shelah. Tamar, desperate for Yehuda's seed, covered her face, dressed as a prostitute, and set out to fulfill her aspirations because she saw in Ruach HaKodesh that progeny would come through Yehuda's line. Yehuda, unaware of who the woman actually was, later reacted in horror when he was told that Tamar was carrying a child. Take her and have her put to death, he ruled. It seemed that Tamar's plans were for naught. She would never bear the offspring that she had envisioned and dreamed for. Now, another story takes place in this week's Parsha. The wife of Potiphar also had a vision. She saw in the stars that she and Yosef would breed greatness. She tried to seduce him because she too wanted to fulfill her idea of the future. But Yosef refused time and time again, finally running away. Rabbi Chum Lubavitz, the Mashgiach of the Mir Yeshiva in Poland, asks a powerful question about these two stories. Both these women had visions, and though their methodology was unconventional, why is there such a difference regarding their personal status? Tamar, known as the mother of the kingdom of David, is viewed as a tzaddiket, a righteous woman, who desperately wanted a child from Yehuda. Yet the wife of Potiphar is treated as an adulteress and a villain who tried to seduce Yosef and then threw him into the jail. How is she so different from Tamar? They both wanted the same thing. They both wanted children from the two men, because they both saw, one saw in the stars and the other one saw Ruach HaKodesh, that greatness would come from both men. So why is Tamar seen as the righteous woman and Potiphar's wife seen as the Rishait, the wicked woman? And here's a story that explains it. Rabbi Baruch Ber Leibowitz, who was Rosh Yeshiva in Kamenetz, a great man before in the early 20th century, had a difficult time finding a match for his oldest daughter. He had an older daughter in Shidduchim. When one of his outstanding students accepted a proposal for marriage, and Rabach was really hoping that student would want his daughter, but he didn't. He went with another girl. Rabach Ber wasn't upset. He was overjoyed for him. He knew this young man to be a scholar and a gentleman. As engagements in those days lasted for a long time, Rabach Ber suggested that he should continue his Torah studies uninterrupted in a different city. One could not imagine Rabach Ber's shock when 2 months later a package arrived containing the gifts that he had given the young man when he got engaged, along with a note stating that the engagement was broken off. Everyone was devastated. A few years later, Rabbi called 3 of his closest students to a private meeting. I'd like you to read a letter. Please tell me if I have tainted it with any personal pain, because I really wanted that young man as a chassan for my daughter. A community was seeking a recommendation concerning a rabbi. They wanted to hire a rabbi, none other than the formerly engaged student, for a rabbinic position. And they turned to Rabbi Baruch Ber Leibowitz for a recommendation, because he had been his Rav. They asked Rav Leibowitz for a letter. Indeed, he wrote a beautiful letter, flowing with praise for the young man. But he was worried that perhaps his personal bitterness may have dulled the response. Perhaps in the letter, he had injected in there some venomous dislike for him, because in the end, he didn't get him as a son-in-law. The The students knew of the incident and were amazed by the praises that the esteemed Rosh Yeshiva had written on the young man's behalf. In doing what he knew was correct, Rabbi Ber had unconditionally removed any personal disappointment from the fact that the young man didn't want to marry his daughter. Rabbi Yochanan goes back to this Parsha and explains, every action has a test that reveals your true intentions. When one fails, do you look to Shemaim and say, God, I tried to do the job my way and I failed, now it's up to you? Or do you scream and curse and perhaps even destroy to get your way? Many people begin noble missions, but when they fail, they start resorting to personal vendettas. So, Tamar failed. And when Yehuda sentenced her for her harlotry, that he wanted to put her to death, she didn't embarrass Yehuda by pointing an accusatory finger and said, aha, it's you. She wouldn't do that. She merely showed the items that he left behind and said, I'm pregnant from the owner of the person who owns this staff, this seal, and this strap. Fortunately, Yehuda admitted his culpability. Tamar was spared, and her children became David HaMelech's grandparents. Potiphar's wife's vision ended as Yosef fled. She could have said, God, I tried to fulfill the dream, and now it's up to you. She didn't. She reacted with vengeance. She had a vendetta and falsely accused Yosef. Yosef was sent to prison. Potiphar's wife is forever branded as an evil temptress. Sometimes failure destroys your nobility in life. Only those acts bred with purity of purpose remain unscathed and continue to flourish with honor in the face of adversity. Ultimately, they succeed, and we reap the fruits of their success for many years to come. So we look at your motive. What's your motive? Are you motivated l'shem shamayim? Then you're not going to do anything nasty to cause pain to others, like Tamar. But like Potiphar's wife, she wasn't motivated l'shem shamayim. Yes, she knew that progeny would come out with Yosef. She didn't realize that it was really Asenat, her daughter. But in the end, when she didn't get Yosef, she resorted to all types of slimery and trickery and hatred towards Yosef and finally branded him as a villain. Here's another Devar Torah, self-introspection. The saga of Yosef needs no introduction. Sold as a slave by his brothers at the age of 17, he ultimately wound up in Egypt at the home of Potiphar. After a very successful stint as Potiphar's main servant, the mistress of the house, Potiphar's wife, desired Yosef, who the Torah describes as a very handsome young man. After her advances are rebuffed, she falsely accuses Yosef of initiating the adulterous offenses she herself wanted to commit with him. Yosef ends up in jail, and in another heavenly orchestrated turn of events, he interprets a couple of dreams which led him down the path to the royal palace. It is there that he's chosen as viceroy, and the rest, of course, is the story of how Yosef's Egypt's sojourn turned into the sojourn of the Jewish nation. The Torah tells us about Yosef's fall from his master's grace by describing the tremendous authority Yosef had in his master's home, Potiphar. There's much to be garnered from the recording of the events from the time that Yosef began his sojourn in the house of Potiphar until he was thrown in jail. The Torah tells us that from the time he appointed him in his house and whatever he had, Hashem blessed Potiphar's house on Yosef's account, so that Hashem's blessing was in whatever he owned, in the house and in the field. Potiphar left all that he had in Yosef's custody, and with him present, he concerned himself with nothing except for the bread he ate. He put all of his assets into Yosef's hands and didn't even give it a second thought. The pasuk that describes Yosef's acclamation is written in an interesting form. And it says there, and it was that Hashem was with Yosef, and it was that he became a successful man, and it was that he remained in the house of his Egyptian master. The commentaries are really bewildered here. Hashem was with Yosef to mean that the name of Shemayim was constantly on his lips. The word Vayehi, and it was, precedes each of these qualities. Each one is mentioned separately. And it was that Hashem was with Yosef, and it was that he became a successful man, and it was that he remained in the house of the Egyptian master. Obviously, what do we need all this redundancy for? The Torah could have stated, and Hashem was with Yosef, who was a very successful in his master's house. Why were the three qualities mentioned separately? A few weeks before the yeshiva dinner for Mordechai Kamenetsky, he decided they would allocate a small budget in order to produce a short video about their school. They were recommended to a professional who had a wonderful reputation with video projects. When Rabbi Kamenetsky asked him if he could produce a high-quality video in the short time frame for a very reasonable fee, he responded with the 5 words that I will never forget: good, fast, cheap, Rabbi? Pick 2 out of the 3. The rabbi looked puzzled, but then the man explained, I can make a good production really fast, Rabbi, but it won't be cheap. I can also make a good production, Rabbi, that won't cost you a bundle, but I can't get it done in less than 2 months. And then he concluded, the videographer concluded, I can make a video really fast and really cheap, but it won't be good. It's not easy having it all, and it's surely not easy being it all. There are varying attributes and qualities that have a difficult time coexisting with each other. There are those who are successful in the name Hashem, with the name Hashem constantly on their lips, yet they cannot exist on that level while in an environment which is hostile to spirituality. However, here's the lesson. Yosef's case, while he was by Potiphar, he was different. There are those who can keep the name of Hashem on their lips even though they remain under foreign domain, yet they are not successful in the outside world. And there are those who are accomplished in the outside world, the house of the foreign master, yet Hashem is not with them. Yosef had the ability to produce all these three qualities, individually and distinctively. Therefore, as three separate qualities which function together in harmony, the Torah tells us that Hashem was with Yosef, and he was successful, and he was in the house of his master. The master of all qualities is truly supreme when he maintains the integrity of each quality, in any situation and under all circumstances. Normally, it's great if you just have one quality out of the three, but Yosef was able to coincidentally and simultaneously maintain all three qualities. Good Shabbos and Shabbat Shalom. Okay, done.